Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas, and we post a video every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to know exactly what we're doing each week.
And don't forget our Monday shorts. So if you've got a burning horticultural question you'd like to ask, put it in the comments below and give me context by telling me where you're from, and we will answer your question on a Monday.
Well, I won't, of course. I'll read them out. Stephen will answer them. But Stephen, it is a very brisk winter's day upon Mount Macedon.
Yes.
I could think of better places to be.
Yes.
But we're actually on your driveway.
Well, we are indeed. Again, yes. We've got a plant that we'd like to really engage with that we realised when we'd done our driveway story. We hadn't given it proper airtime. So there you go.
So here we are, Driveway Revisited, the
Yes.
lost novel of Evelyn Waugh. And in fact, there are so many things on your driveway, so we are going to continue to drop in and out. So what are we going to revisit?
All right, well, we're going to look at the Clethra that's along my driveway, Clethra fargesii.
And here's the image of it in full bloom in summer.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to look at it in its winter form and also talk about the genus as a whole, because I think it's a very interesting genus of plants that perhaps hasn't had the prominence in horticulture, certainly in Australia, that it deserves.
And in our driveway epic, which of course we'll link, we didn't have time to really dive into each of the plants seasonally. Otherwise, it would have ended up a 2-hour biblical epic.
Well, it would have been. It would have been bigger than Ben-Hur.
I was going to say, yeah, shot in the desert over 4 years. Anyway,
Yeah.
So let's just get on with it and go and find the Clethra and see what you were referring to. So in the driveway footage, in summer when we shot it,
Yeah.
you talked about its bark.
Yes.
And we didn't look at it in winter for our driveway epic. So this is what we're going to go and look at now.
All right, good.
Let's go.
All right, so here we are standing in front of it, shivering away in its naked winterness. So why don't we go back and have a look at what the Clethra looked like in high summer?
And so another pendulous white flower.
And scented.
And scented.
It's got a really musky perfume.
Yeah.
Clethra. We have talked about Clethra before in some of our videos.
Sounds familiar.
Different ones.
Yes.
It's a weird little genus. There's not that many species of it, but there are a number from China and through other parts of Asia. There are some nice North American Clethras as well.
Yeah.
And then there's one sort of, well, there's a couple of outriders really. There's one, at least one that comes from Mexico. And there is also an evergreen one that comes from Madeira. And so
It gets around.
It does get around. Now, this one is one of the Chinese species, Clethra fargesii. And by the way, Clethra comes from the Greek for elder, as in the elder tree. And I'm not quite sure of the connection. I think some of the Clethras might have elder-like foliage. So otherwise, there's no real connection I can think of. But this is another plant that pays its way down my driveway. It flowers in high summer, which is really useful. It colours superbly in the autumn.
Right.
So it goes oranges, yellows, and even vaguely into reds in the autumn. So when it's shedding, it looks fantastic. And as a bare stemmed plant in the winter, it has really lovely bark and trunks. So it actually has, I think, as good a bark as some of your crepe myrtles and that sort of thing. So on the main trunks, you get this beautiful patchy bark.
Right.
So it's interesting in the winter as well. So again, it pays.
We might have to wait until it sheds to see the bark.
We'll hopefully visit it again in the autumn, look at its autumn colour, and then we'll have a look at it in the winter when it's bare, so that you can see how this plant actually does pay its way.
So it's not quite fully open yet, but still the bees and the butterflies are loving it. And there is a beautiful fragrance.
Oh, and look, give it another week or two when the flowers come fully out. This will be one of those plants people will walk down the driveway and they'll sort of not quite figure where it's coming from, and they'll come in and go, where is that perfume? And so the Clethra, once smelt, you never forget that scent, because it's a completely different sort of perfume.
Once smelt, never forgotten. On to the next.
Yes, let's go.
Well, that was a beautiful sunny day, which is not today. Never mind. Let's not go on about the weather because it's boring.
Yes, it is rather.
Well, so Clethra, Stephen.
All right.
Firstly, then, give us a little 101.
All right.
What is it? Where's it from?
All right, the genus itself is a moderate-sized one. There's around about 89, I think, recognised species.
Yep.
So it's a reasonable-sized genus. They're all white-flowered, or when I say that, there are one or two pink selections that have been found of recent times.
Oh.
But basically all the wild forms are white flowered, and they have a really weird distribution. Fargesii, the one we're talking about and featuring, is one of the Asian species, and there's a range of species that come through Asia. Then there's another quite large group of them that come through the Americas, right down into Mexico.
Oh.
And then there's a weird one that seems to be a bit of an outlier that comes from Madeira. And it used to be on the Canaries, but is now considered extinct there. And it's become feral on the Azores, which is really weird. They imported it to the Azores for, I assume, soil stabilisation in the wild or something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, the climate's so much similar in the Azores to Madeira that it's actually become a weedy species there.
Well, two things. We have, of course, made a video about both the Azores and Madeira, which we'll link above.
Yep.
But have you and I seen that, Clethra?
Oh, yes. And in fact, it's a very common one up here. And I think I remember telling you that whenever I smell Clethra in flower,
This was your childhood flashback.
It takes me back to my childhood every time, like perfumes often do. And so almost every big garden on Mount Macedon has Clethra arborea, which is the Madeiran one.
Yeah.
And it's a huge big grower, evergreen, solidly dark green foliage, almost the same colour as the average camellia leaf.
Yeah.
And then the sprays of white lily of the valley like flowers in late summer, early autumn, with the most evocative musky fragrance. And that's something that the Clethras as a group do pretty well. Most of them do have lovely perfumes.
No, I remember too, yes, this did have a fragrance which we sniffed. Obviously, when we saw it, it was in full bloom. But the first thing I noticed is that the dead flower heads have stayed on like tassels. It's actually quite beautiful.
Yeah, look, as long as you don't mind brown as a garden colour.
But this is very Piet Udolf and
Yes,
all those dead prairie flowers.
Yeah.
So keeping seed heads is...
Yeah, look, and I don't
Visual.
mind them myself. I think they do make for an interesting winter effect in the garden.
Yeah.
And it would be quite tedious if you decided you didn't like them and you decided to try and get them all off.
Yes,
So,
true.
yes, you'd go around with a pair of secateurs for hours on end. So I quite like them, and I'm happy to accept them as part of the plant's features that run throughout the year.
Now, the thing that you mentioned, which we didn't actually then incorporate in the video, was you said the thing about this was that its bark was as good as...
A crepe myrtle.
Now, I have a passion for crepe myrtle bark, Stephen Ryan. I'm just here to share that with you. And I am looking at this bark,
Yeah.
and it doesn't compare.
Well, I might have been a little bit excited.
Poetic.
And yes, maybe a bit poetic, but it still does have lovely trunks and it does get nice mottled bark. And I have to say, the bark looks better when it's wet.
That's okay, but that's a lot of... I mean, are you going to literally walk around the garden sloshing things with water because they look better when they're wet, Stephen?
No, but what I'm going to say is that we're in a cold day, but it's a dry day.
Yeah.
Were it raining, the bark of this tree would be actually more spectacular and attractive.
Okay, well, we're going to spin the camera around and you're going to show us just how spectacular this is going to look.
All right, I'll have to prove myself.
Yes.
So, Matthew, I am going to prove my point, I hope, by wetting the trunk on this Clethra, and you can see whether you think the bark is attractive or not. So here we go. See, look at that. It stands out much better.
Wow, Stephen Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm actually... No, you're right. It does show the colour variations better.
It does, and it's glossier and shinier. So on
That's
wet
just 'cause it's
days,
wet.
that's what you get.
So, Stephen, remind me, where was this particular one from?
All right, this is one of the Chinese ones.
Right.
So Clethra fargesii.
And how old is this specimen?
It was planted in about 1985.
Oh.
So it's not the world's fastest growing shrub.
No.
But it's now, what, 3.5 to 4 metres tall and probably wider than it is tall.
Yeah.
So it's quite a substantial shrub now.
Yeah. And actually, you've got a winter flowering clematis growing through it.
I have, which is another little sort of something that you can do to dress them up a bit.
And which one is that?
That's Clematis cirrhosa from the Mediterranean.
Wonderful. All right, so this is Chinese.
Yeah.
So what are its ideal growing conditions? Obviously, you're in Mount Macedon, you get cold winters,
Yeah.
reasonably warm, dryish summers.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would say anywhere that you grow good rhododendrons, azaleas, camellias, all those sorts of things, would be pretty well ideal conditions for particularly the deciduous Clethras. The evergreen ones are probably not quite so cold hardy in the colder parts of the Northern Hemisphere.
And where do the evergreen ones come from?
Well, the Madeiran one is one of them.
Yes.
And the other evergreen one that I have grown, and we'll put some footage of that in as well, is a Mexican one.
All right.
So
is that the one over there?
that's the one on the other side of the driveway.
We'll go and look at that.
Yeah, so that's Clethra pringlei.
Mr. Prinkle.
I assume so, or maybe Mrs. Pringle, I don't know.
Possibly.
But yeah, so the evergreen ones are not quite so cold hardy, but I think they're fabulous, in fact, with things like rhododendrons, azaleas, camellias, etc.
Yeah.
Because they flower in the late summer when those groups of plants rarely, if ever, flower.
Yeah.
The deciduous ones have quite good autumn colour on them as well, which then sort of takes away some of that heavy evergreenness of the other shrubs.
Of the evergreens.
Yes, exactly. Because it likes similar soil types and conditions. It likes a cool root run, likes an acidic soil, likes humus, leaf mold, all that sort of stuff. So the Clethras are really good companion plants, and there's some small American varieties as well. So they're various in size. So you can fit them in either between or in front or even behind, depending on which Clethra you buy.
Ah, interesting. All right. Anything else about this one before we cross over to Mexico?
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind is there's another quite closely related species called Delavei, and Delavei looks very much like this one, except that it has an upright, layered, tiered sort of narrow form. So if you're looking for one for a restricted spot, and in fact it might have even been better along my driveway than this one, Delavei has a very upright and narrow sort of form, so it makes for a very useful garden shrub.
All right, well, let's cunningly spin the camera around just to that side. So we didn't cover this at all in our driveway
No, it was
epic.
sort of hidden behind and not all that terribly obvious, but I'm hoping as years go by it will become more of a feature along the driveway.
All right, let's go and have a look.
Now this one, Matthew, is a comparatively new one in my collection, and I only got it a few years ago, and it's one of the Mexican species of Clethra, Clethra pringlei, and it has flowered. I've had a little spray of white flowers on it. I have to say I haven't noticed any appreciable perfume with it at this point in time, but it is meant to be scented. And something that I find really interesting, Clethra is in its more or less own family. There's one other genus in the family, Clethracea, and yet the flowers sit on the plant in very much the same way as something that's in the Ericaceae family, which of course is the Pieris. And I have a Pieris right in front. So it flowers in the spring, it's non-scented, it's an evergreen shrub, and is well known and well loved in cultivation almost worldwide. But the Clethras are far less known and yet have a similar sort of value in the garden. Now, Clethra pringlei doesn't come from the hot, dry parts of Mexico, so it comes from up in the hills where it's cooler, gets some moisture. So it would be in a climatic zone not dissimilar to the ones I saw in Madeira. So don't think of it just because it's Mexican that it's going to be growing amongst agaves and what have you. It will be in the cooler mountain areas where it gets adequate moisture.
Well, Stephen, I've loved our deep dive into Clethra.
Yes, it's an obscure genus, but well worthwhile growing.
Obscure genuses are your middle name.
Well, they are rather, yes.
Quick note too, just an aesthetic note. We've mentioned this before, but the wall of this is a restaurant, a cafe that's here. It's painted a dark grey. It's the perfect foil for foliage and plants, isn't
It's fabulous. I'm so pleased they decided to go that way.
Well, if you want to know what we're doing next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
And don't forget our Monday short. So please put a comment below and we'll come around to answering your questions in Monday shorts.
We will. And hopefully next time we meet, Stephen, it'll be warmer.
Yes, let's hope.
We look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, bye all.